See, I'm the only guy who never gets an introduction. But let me thank Randy and the AFT for all of the work you've done, not only in the efforts to try to rebuild Puerto Rico, but for your focus on education in Puerto Rico and all over this country. Let me start off by making a point that needs to be made over and over again, because I fear that some of my colleagues in the Congress and certainly many of our fellow Americans don't know. And that is that the people of Puerto Rico are American citizens and must be treated as full American citizens. It seems obvious, but there are some parts of the Congress in which people are deeply concerned about the problems from the hurricanes in Florida and Texas, not so much in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And that is an issue we cannot lose focus on. Other point that I would make is that all of you know that we are the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. We're not a poor nation. Yet, more than 5 months after Hurricanes Irma and Maria struck Puerto Rico, more than 30%, over 900,000 people, are still without electricity on the island. About 270 schools still lack electricity. Some areas of Puerto Rico will not see power until as late as the end of May, about 8 months after Hurricane Maria pummeled the island. Think about it for a moment. The wealthiest, most powerful nation in the history of the world, with incredible resources that could destroy half of the world at a moment's notice, and yet some 900,000 fellow American citizens are still without electricity. Do you think that would be happening in Westchester County, New York? Probably not. Not in Los Angeles, not in Burlington, Vermont. There is something very wrong in that picture. Furthermore, more than 200,000 people have left the island since Maria. Some 27,000 of the 350,000 students attending public school in Puerto Rico before the storm are now attending schools on the mainland. More than 160 schools have already been closed, and hundreds more are being considered for closure as the population continues to erode and intense pressure mounts to transition to private charter schools. That is not acceptable, and we are here today to tell the people of Puerto Rico that they are not forgotten, that they are not alone, and that we will do everything we possibly can to rebuild the island. And one of the political points that we always have to keep in mind in the midst of this discussion is, above and beyond the prejudices that certain members of Congress may have, is the simple reality that right here, when we talk about disaster relief, Texas has 2 senators, Florida has 2 senators, Puerto Rico has 0 senators, Virgin Islands has 0 senators. So I think what you heard Senator Warren say, and others will say, is that if Puerto Rico has no representation in the United States, all of us together must be that representation. And that is why we are here today to demand that Congress and the White House stand up and do the right thing for the people of Puerto Rico. And we want to make it clear that in doing that, as we rebuild Puerto Rico from the disasters it recently experienced, that it will not be good enough to go back to the status quo, a status quo which left the island in poverty, severe underdevelopment, and a totally inadequate electrical system. It also will not be good enough to allow what I call disaster capitalism. people who take advantage of a disaster to do bad things. And what they are trying to do in this moment, this terrible moment for Puerto Rico, is to move very aggressively to privatize public services like schools and the electric grid. The proposal in Puerto Rico to transition to charter schools and the use of private school vouchers is one that mirrors what happened in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. You're all familiar with that. And today, more than 90% of the students in New Orleans attend private charter schools. The school privatization proposal in Puerto Rico would pull much-needed money away from public schools and direct it to for-profit and fly-by-night charter schools that have little interest in the children and communities in Puerto Rico. And I just talked to one of your teachers who made the very important point that how do you deal with education without first talking to teachers, educators, mayors, parents, people on the ground? And certainly this proposal does not do that. It would completely, the proposal at hand would completely disrupt and destabilize the existing public school system already struggling to rebuild after the hurricanes. We cannot allow public schools to be closed and turned into charter schools that care more about profits than they do about the children of Puerto Rico. And that is why, together with other senators, including Senators Warren and Blumenthal, who are going to be speaking with you today, I introduced a bill that would invest $146 billion in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Beyond rebuilding damaged facilities, our bill makes a major investment in services and facilities for public Head Start, elementary, secondary, and higher education. Our bill also includes a provision that would reject efforts to privatize those services. The bill proposes a proactive investment in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands infrastructure. As bad as our infrastructure is on the mainland, it is far worse in the territories. For example, if we want the children of Puerto Rico to meet the challenges of the 21st century economy, we must bring schools up to standards befitting the United States of America and adequately staff them with excellent teachers who have the right to form a union. But clearly that is not what has been happening. Extreme austerity measures have closed hundreds of schools and strangled the budgets of those that remain. Thousands of teachers have been furloughed or laid off. Wages have been stagnant at best. Furthermore, we cannot ignore the reality that Puerto Rico is also struggling with an unsustainable $74.8 billion debt, much of which is held by Wall Street vulture funds. It is bad enough that the PROMESA Act took away the democratic rights of U.S. citizens living in Puerto Rico by setting up an undemocratic control board empowered with the authority to slash pensions, fire teachers, and close hospitals. At a time when so many in Puerto Rico are living in poverty and desperation, we must help solve their fiscal crisis in a way that protects the people of Puerto Rico and not greedy Wall Street interests. You know, we live in a world and a nation of incredible greed, but it never ceases to amaze me how people with billions and billions of dollars are prepared to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, or the services that the people of Puerto Rico desperately need in order to make billions more. That is a fundamental issue. The greed which is doing so much harm to this country, that is a fundamental issue that we as a nation are going to have to deal with. There is also a reality that many federal policies, existing federal policies, treat U.S. citizens in the territories differently than U.S. citizens in the 50 states. For example, as you know, the federal government caps total Medicaid spending for the territories, something it does not do for any of the states. So what's good for Vermont or for Texas should be good for Puerto Rico. Likewise, eligible senior citizens are automatically enrolled for Medicare Part B and discounted prescription drugs in the states, but not in Puerto Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands. These federal laws deprive many seniors and low-income citizens of the health care they need. It is a travesty that in 2018, we value the health of some U.S. citizens more than the health of others. So when we look at Puerto Rico, we're talking about rebuilding infrastructure. We're talking about rebuilding the electrical grid in a way that is sustainable, which takes advantage of maybe Puerto Rico's greatest resources, the sun, rather than fossil fuel. And we are also aware that we got a healthcare crisis in Puerto Rico as well. So that's the bad news. But the good news is that we can fix these policies, and we can do it now. Just as we can restore federal minimum wage and overtime protections for all workers in Puerto Rico, and just as we can ensure that people in the territories can access the earned income and child care tax credits just as other citizens. In other words, once again, people of Puerto Rico are American citizens. They deserve the same benefits that people in the mainland get. End of discussion on that issue. So to the people of Puerto Rico, we say you are not alone. We will stand with you. To the AFT, we thank you very much for not only your stand on educational issues, but your understanding that this is a painful moment for the people of Puerto Rico. Last point that I want to make is these hurricanes were made worse by climate change. All right? Now, we have a president who thinks that climate change is a hoax. We have a head of the Environmental Protection Agency who does not believe in environmental protection. But we know that as a nation, as a world, we are going to have to get a handle on this issue of climate change so that we do not continue to see the kinds of disasters we saw 5 months ago. So let us work together to take on the fossil fuel industry. Let us work together to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel and into sustainable energies, which would be so important for Puerto Rico. A lot of work to be done. We look forward to working with you. Thank you all very much.